New York. Underworld is usually told through legendary mobsters and blockbuster films, but the real problem is that those stories are incomplete. Tonight, we uncover the hidden network that truly controlled New York, the secret empire that operated beneath the streets, behind the politicians, and beyond the law the one history tried to bury. By the end of this video, you'll understand how real power moved through New York, and why these secrets still matter today. New York City skyscrapers, bright lights, endless ambition. But beneath the glamour lies a darker truth, an invisible structure of crime, corruption, and influence that shaped the city more than any official history book admits. This isn't just a story about mobsters. It's a story about engineers who designed secret escape routes, fixers who brokered deals in the shadows, and politicians who needed the underworld more than they wanted to admit. Welcome to the real story inside New York's forgotten underworld empire. For decades, New York's criminal world has been portrayed as a battleground of notorious mob bosses, turf wars, assassinations, and smoky backroom deals. But the truth is far bigger, far quieter, and far more unsettling. Because behind every famous name, behind every headline-making crime, there existed a shadow framework, a carefully constructed architecture of power that most people never saw. It wasn't built overnight, and it wasn't built by gangsters alone. It was engineered, piece by piece, by individuals who understood one thing better than anyone else. Real power does not live in the spotlight. It thrives in the dark. The foundation of New York's underworld empire was not violence, but influence. Influence over unions, influence over construction companies, influence over city departments that approved licenses, permits, and multi-million-dollar projects. When an ordinary citizen looked at a rising skyscraper, they saw progress. But the underworld saw something different: control. Every steel beam, every contract, every supplier represented another thread in a widening web of profit and leverage. This hidden structure operated like a parallel government. The public elected mayors and council members, but in the shadows, deals were brokered by men whose names never appeared on ballots. The city moved according to two sets of rules. The official ones everyone knew, and the unofficial ones whispered in private rooms, hotel lounges, and unmarked offices. This second set of rules determined which businesses thrived, which developers succeeded, and which competitors mysteriously fell apart. One of the most striking aspects of this architecture was how seamlessly legitimate industries blended with criminal operations. There was no clear dividing line. Construction firms worked with mob-controlled unions, banks discreetly funneled funds through shell companies, and political consultants ensured that key decision-makers stayed friendly or fearful. These were not random collaborations. They were strategic alignments, linkages between worlds that pretended to be separate but were secretly interdependent. A developer needed labor peace, a union boss needed political cover, a politician needed campaign funding, and a financier needed city contracts. Each one benefited, and each one became part of the structure, whether they acknowledged it or not. And the people orchestrating this weren't the individuals splashed across newspapers. It was the lawyers who drafted ambiguous contracts, ensuring that nothing could be traced. The accountants who transformed dirty money into legitimate profit streams. The brokers who connected city officials to underworld negotiators without ever appearing in the same room. These were the architects, and they didn't use blueprints. They used relationships, favors, threats, and silence as their building materials. Their empire wasn't marked on any map, yet it influenced every borough, every major project, every major business decision. To the public, New York presented itself as a city of opportunity and ambition. But beneath that image existed a quiet system that dictated who actually advanced. A system where access mattered more than talent, where loyalty mattered more than law, and where secrets were valued more than truth. And the most remarkable part of this hidden architecture wasn't just how effective it was, but how invisible it managed to remain for so long. When people talk about New York's rise, its towers, its wealth, its unstoppable energy, they usually point to the visionaries, the entrepreneurs, the bold risk-takers who pushed the city forward. But behind that shimmering narrative lies another story, one far less glamorous and far more influential. Because New York did not rise on ambition alone. It rose on deals made in silence, on favors exchanged behind locked doors, and on a network of corruption so discreet, so deeply woven into the city's growth, that most people never realized how much it shaped the skyline they admire today. This corruption wasn't the kind that made headlines. It wasn't the dramatic kind involving scandals, raids, or public arrests. No, this corruption was patient, strategic, cold. It lived in zoning adjustments, in construction approvals, in city contracts that quietly shifted hundreds of millions of dollars into the hands of people who knew exactly which strings to pull. Every neighborhood expansion, every major building project, every shift in city power had someone behind the scenes ensuring that certain interests were protected and certain pockets were filled. What made this corruption so powerful was its subtlety. You wouldn't notice it if you lived in the city at the time. A building being approved seemed normal. A company winning a contract seemed routine. But beneath these everyday events, underworld figures, political operatives, and businessmen shared a silent language. They understood that progress could be profitable in more ways than one, and that the growth of New York provided the perfect cover for personal gain. They didn't need to shout or threaten or draw attention. They simply needed the right handshake at the right moment. The city government itself wasn't immune. In many periods of New York's history, departments that were supposed to enforce regulations operated more like gatekeepers of opportunity. Access to permits, licenses, and projects often depended less on compliance and more on who you were aligned with. Decisions weren't always made based on what benefited the public. They were made based on what benefited the system, the quiet, intricate system that thrived on invisibility and dependence. If a developer wanted their project approved without delays, they knew who to call. If a businessman wanted access to a new market, they knew whose favor to win. And if a politician wanted to secure votes or funding, they knew which groups could deliver. During eras of rapid expansion, especially in construction and real estate, the underworld and the legitimate world merged more tightly than ever. Mob-controlled unions ensured that jobs moved smoothly, but they also made sure that certain companies operated without competition. Political allies ensured no investigations disrupted the flow of money. Banks and lenders played along, sometimes unknowingly, sometimes with full awareness, allowing funds to be filtered through layer after layer until their origins became untraceable. Corruption became less an exception and more a structural part of how the city grew. What made it even more dangerous was how normalized it became. People inside the system stopped thinking of it as corruption and started seeing it as just the way things worked. If you wanted a career in construction, you expected to pay someone or owe someone or fear someone. If you wanted to run a successful business, you expected a visit from someone who offered insurance. These unwritten rules governed everything from small neighborhood shops to billion-dollar projects, creating a city where progress often required compromise, and where compromise often meant giving power to people who thrived in the grayest parts of the law. And through all of this, the public had no idea how much their city's rise depended on these hidden exchanges. They saw towering buildings, expanding neighborhoods, and booming industries, never realizing the darker forces that shaped all of it. The corruption was never loud. It didn't need to be. It worked best in silence, operating through connections and influence, subtly guiding the city's evolution while staying just out of sight. Whenever history talks about New York's criminal world, it fixates on the icons, the loud names, the infamous bosses, the men who posed for mugshots that became part of American mythology. But those men, as powerful as they appeared, were only the surface. The true engine of New York's underworld empire wasn't driven by the bosses giving orders. It was driven by the people who never appeared in photographs, never boasted about their achievements, and never wanted their names to be known. These were the forgotten figures, the quiet operators working in the shadows, and without them, the entire empire would have collapsed. These figures didn't wear flashy suits or run nightclubs or issue violent commands. Their power came from their knowledge, their access, and their ability to move unseen. They were the bookkeepers who understood exactly how much money flowed in and out of every operation. They knew which businesses were fronts, which deals were real, and which numbers needed to be rewritten before anyone from the outside noticed. They weren't criminals in the traditional sense. They were professionals, accountants, clerks, managers who discovered that the underworld valued their skills even more than legitimate companies ever could. Then there were the smugglers, the ones who brought in everything the city wasn't supposed to have. During Prohibition, they moved liquor across state lines with the precision of military logisticians. In later decades, they smuggled materials, commodities, even people. They didn't receive the attention that mob leaders did, but they were the veins of the empire, carrying the lifeblood that kept everything running. Without their roots, their contacts, and their timing, the larger operations would have been starved of resources in weeks. Another group operated even deeper in the dark: the informants and information brokers. They weren't spies in the traditional sense. They were secretaries in police precincts who overheard the right conversations, clerks who had access to sealed files, and employees inside city offices who could tip off underworld contacts the moment a raid was planned or an investigation was approved. These individuals were never publicly identified, yet their influence was immeasurable. A single whispered warning from them could save an entire operation, prevent arrests, or allow the underworld to relocate assets before law enforcement even arrived at the scene. Still, others acted as mediators, smooth talkers who could negotiate deals between rival families, business interests, or political allies without ever revealing their own loyalties. They kept wars from exploding, kept peace when tension ran too high, and ensured the flow of money never stopped. They didn't carry weapons, yet they held the power to escalate or de-escalate conflicts with a single decision. Their value wasn't in force, but in intelligence, charisma, and an unmatched understanding of how people operated under pressure. What made these forgotten figures so vital was that they never sought recognition. They operated with a deliberate lack of visibility. They stayed out of photographs, avoided public meetings, and kept their names away from official documents. Many used aliases or no names at all. Some were so expertly hidden that even historians struggle to confirm who they were or what roles they played. They designed their own anonymity because invisibility was their form of protection. A mob boss might be targeted by law enforcement or rival factions, but someone who didn't officially exist could continue their work indefinitely. Their silence was their power, and their power was immense. They connected the underworld to legitimate society in ways that mob bosses could never do alone. They managed money, controlled information, manipulated systems, and kept the machinery of corruption turning without ever stepping onto a crime scene. And even though they built no monuments and left behind almost no records, their influence shaped the entire structure of New York's hidden empire, leaving an imprint so deep that it can still be felt today, even if their names have long been forgotten. Beneath the roaring subway lines and the crowded streets of New York lies a world most people never think about. A world carved out quietly, patiently, and deliberately by those who needed places where the law couldn't reach them, where deals could be struck without witnesses, and where power could move without leaving footprints. These weren't the dramatic underground layers you see in movies. They were far more subtle, far more practical, and designed with one purpose: to keep operations invisible. Over decades, these tunnels, passages, and forgotten rooms formed the hidden infrastructure of New York's underworld empire. Some of these spaces originated from abandoned public projects, half-finished transit expansions, and old service corridors built during the city's growth but never officially used. Others were carved out privately, under buildings that had no reason to include extra basements or double walls. During Prohibition, speakeasy owners discovered that liquor moved faster and safer when it traveled under the streets instead of above them. What started as small escape routes behind taverns gradually expanded into interconnected paths linking hotels, clubs, storage rooms, and waterfront access points. Smugglers realized they didn't just need hidden places to store goods, they needed hidden routes to transport them. What made these underground paths so effective was how unassuming they appeared: a tunnel disguised as a maintenance hallway, a bricked-up doorway that wasn't always bricked, A metal hatch that looked like part of a boiler system but opened into a narrow passage leading directly to another building. These were spaces built not for convenience but for secrecy, designed to guide the right people through the city without ever touching the streets. To anyone else, they were forgotten leftovers from old infrastructure. But to the underworld, they were safe corridors, the arteries of a shadow network that allowed movement, meetings, and transactions without attracting attention. Hidden meeting spots grew naturally around these passageways. Some were in abandoned subway platforms that had been shut down decades earlier, left in darkness except for the flicker of unreliable electric lines. Others were tucked inside old warehouses by the waterfront, where rooms were constructed behind false walls and accessible only through disguised entrances. These places were chosen not because they were comfortable, but because they were reliable. Nothing inside them was recorded. No conversations were overheard. No unexpected visitors ever wandered in. The fewer people who knew they existed, the more valuable they became. And these hidden spaces weren't used exclusively by criminals. Corrupt politicians, compromised officers, and businessmen with too much to lose found them just as useful. They provided the perfect backdrop for whispered agreements that would later reshape entire industries or redirect millions of dollars, a handshake that could never be witnessed, a document that could be exchanged without appearing in any office, a negotiation that no reporter, no investigator, no outsider could ever trace. These were the moments that truly built New York's underworld empire, and they happened in places the city had forgotten. Some of the most important criminal strategies were finalized in these hidden rooms. Territory disputes, union negotiations, payments to key officials, and shipments of goods were all coordinated underground. People who used these spaces often entered through different routes to avoid being seen together. They came in separately and left separately, minimizing the chance that anyone could connect them. Trust was fragile in the underworld, and secrecy was the only way to maintain control. Even today, remnants of these places still exist, sealed doorways in subway tunnels, unexplained bricked arches beneath old buildings, ventilation shafts that lead nowhere but clearly once led somewhere important. They are quiet reminders of how much activity once flowed through the darkened spaces beneath New York, unseen and unrecorded. And although the empire that relied on them may have faded, the hidden routes they used continue to whisper stories of a time when the city's real power traveled where no eyes could follow. The relationship between New York's underworld and law enforcement was never as simple as cops versus criminals. That's the story people like to believe, the noble detective who cleans up the streets, the brave officer who refuses to bow to corruption. But the reality beneath that heroic image was far more complicated, far more tangled, and far more troubling. Because for decades, the underworld didn't just evade law enforcement. At times it worked with them, through them, and occasionally even above them. And the deeper you look, the more you realize that the real mystery isn't what criminals hid from the police, it's what the police helped hide from everyone else. There were entire precincts where the line between officer and accomplice blurred so completely that it became impossible to tell where enforcement ended and collaboration began. Some officers accepted payments quietly. Others accepted favors, influence, or promises of protection. And some didn't need to be paid at all. They simply understood that challenging certain powers would end their careers or worse. The underworld didn't need to control every cop. It only needed to control a few strategically placed ones. A sergeant with access to case files, a lieutenant who handled assignments, a clerk who knew when warrants were issued. Information flowed both ways, but the balance of power was often in the shadows. The most unsettling part of this cooperation wasn't the bribes. It was the silence around missing or altered records. Case files that should have exposed entire networks simply vanished. Evidence seized during raids turned up incomplete. Reports were rewritten, softened, or misfiled deliberately. Suspects who should have been arrested slipped away because someone tipped them off minutes before officers arrived. These weren't accidents. They were decisions made by individuals who understood exactly what they were doing and who they were protecting. In certain cases, high-profile investigations collapsed for reasons that never made sense publicly. Witnesses disappeared not because they were intimidated by criminals, but because someone within the system facilitated their relocation or ensured their statements never reached the courtroom. Officers who tried to push too hard against the wrong figures were transferred to distant precincts or assigned to cases that kept them far from anything sensitive. The message was always the same: some truths were not meant to be uncovered. Political pressure added another layer to this hidden world. Mayors, district attorneys, and city officials often needed the appearance of control more than actual control. Crime statistics were massaged to maintain public confidence. Investigations were delayed until after elections. Deals were made to ensure that certain scandals didn't explode at the wrong moment. And underneath those political calculations were the underworld figures who understood that influence could protect them more effectively than any weapon. Some officers turned a blind eye not out of greed or fear, but out of a belief that the underworld kept certain parts of the city manageable. If a criminal network maintained order in a neighborhood, keeping violence contained, ensuring predictable patterns, some law enforcement officials quietly preferred that stability. They convinced themselves that dismantling these networks would create chaos, and so they, searching through archives, encounter gaps, inconsistencies, and unexplained omissions. The trail doesn't end because the criminals hid it. It ends because the system helped bury it. And the most haunting part is that many of the individuals who made these decisions never faced consequences. They retired quietly, lived comfortably, and carried their secrets with them, leaving behind a legacy of silence that still shapes how we understand New York's hid a win. People talk about New York's underworld. They usually speak of it as something that ended long ago, an era of smoky backrooms, coded messages, and back alley dealings, all fading into history like a distant chapter the city has outgrown. But the truth is far more unsettling. Because even though the empire that once ruled from the shadows may have fractured, disappeared, or evolved, the blueprint it created continues to influence New York in ways most people never recognize. The ghosts of that underground system are still here, woven into the city's infrastructure, its politics, its business culture, and most of all, its unspoken rules. You can see its fingerprints in the real estate market, where sudden bursts of unexplained capital still pour into developments that seem far beyond the means of their stated investors. You can see it in the way certain companies always win the biggest contracts, even when their bids are mysteriously higher than their competitors. And you can see it in the quiet understanding shared among insiders that success in New York often depends not only on what you build, but on who you know, who you owe, and who you avoid crossing. These patterns didn't appear out of nowhere. They are echoes of an older structure and architecture of influence designed by people who understood that power lasts longest when it hides in plain sight. Some of today's most established institutions still operate in ways shaped by decades of underworld influence. Unions that were once controlled by mob families didn't simply vanish when the headlines faded. Their leadership changed, their image modernized, but the internal culture built on loyalty, hierarchy, and strategic leverage remained deeply rooted. City departments that once relied on unofficial alliances to keep projects moving still function with layers of bureaucracy that make transparency difficult and favoritism easy. And businesses that thrived because of past connections continue to thrive because those connections evolved into powerful networks that no longer look criminal, yet still operate with the same intensity. The underworld's legacy is also etched into the physical city. Walk through certain neighborhoods and you'll find buildings with oddly placed extensions, sealed doorways, or windowless backrooms that were once used for operations no one dared acknowledge. Warehouses near the waterfront still contain hints of passageways designed for discreet loading. Even some older hotels and restaurants have private entrances and hidden corridors that served purposes long forgotten by the public, but remembered by those who used them. These structures remain not because they are needed today, but because they were built so deeply into the city's bones that removing them would be nearly impossible. But the most revealing legacy isn't in the buildings or the bureaucracy, it's in the culture of secrecy that still surrounds certain sectors of the city. In politics, there are deals that never appear in official records yet determine the fate of entire districts. In finance, there are funds whose origins are vague enough to raise questions but protected by enough layers to prevent answers. In law enforcement, there are still moments when investigations shift unexpectedly, when cases collapse without clear explanations, and when old alliances shaped by decades of shared history quietly influence decisions. People often wonder how New York maintains its status as a global center of power, money, and influence. Part of that story lies in its innovation and ambition, but another part lies in a hidden inheritance, an old system of backchannel negotiations, strategic silence, and invisible leverage. A system built by people who understood how to manipulate the city's weaknesses and turn them into strengths. A system that rewarded loyalty, punished betrayal, and valued information more than gold. Even though the faces have changed and the stakes have evolved, the blueprint remains. It guides decisions in ways most residents never notice, shaping outcomes that seem natural but are anything but natural. And every time the city undergoes a major transformation, every time a neighborhood is rapidly developed, every time a powerful figure rises out of nowhere, every time a major deal happens behind closed doors, you can feel that old architecture at work, quietly modeling the future the same way it molded the past. For generations, New York's underworld empire operated like a second city hidden beneath the first, an invisible structure built on influence instead of laws, secrets instead of records, and alliances instead of elections. It wasn't just a network of criminals. It was an entire ecosystem that shaped construction, finance, politics, and power. It thrived in silence, expanded in shadows, and left behind a legacy deeper and more complex than any crime headline could ever capture. The real architects were never the names the world remembers. They were the unseen strategists, the accountants, the fixers, the brokers who wove together the machinery of corruption so tightly that it became indistinguishable from the city's growth. They carved tunnels under streets, roots behind walls, and connections inside institutions, creating pathways for deals that could never be witnessed and decisions that could never be traced. And they did it all with the quiet cooperation of people sworn to stop them, officers who looked away, officials who protected the wrong interests, and leaders who knew that preserving silence often meant preserving power. Even as the empire faded, its blueprint survived. It lingered in the policies that favored the few, in the neighborhoods reshaped by unseen forces, in the contracts that always seemed to fall into the same hands. It survives in the unspoken understanding that in New York, the real story often lies behind the official version, and the real power often moves where no one is looking. What we uncovered wasn't just a hidden part of history. It was a reminder that every great city has two identities, the one it shows the world, and the one it tries to bury. New York's underworld empire may no longer command the shadows the way it once did, but its influence still echoes beneath the concrete, reminding us that the past is never truly gone. It simply changes form, waiting for the next person curious enough to look beneath the surface and see the city for what it really is.